Good morning. Thank you for that kind invitation, and also I appreciated the welcome here this morning. I left the Department of Education in the middle of February, so I've been actually off for 4 months now, about 4 months, and have enjoyed it. My husband and I took a road trip. Heard of those recently? Speaking of blasts from the past, this is all about history. We took a road trip around the West, and he just reminded me of the license plates. We saw all the license plates, including Alaska and Hawaii, except Delaware and New Hampshire. Who's from Delaware or New Hampshire? Take your cars, get out on the road, start driving around. People are looking for you. Okay, so good morning. I'm very happy to be here. I love the conversations that I was able to have yesterday with many of you, and really tremendously enthusiastic about the work that NMC has been doing. It's important work, and you all are convening here not to listen, but to talk with each other and think things through. So first of all, let's have just a quick warm-up. You have your cards. Don't take them out. We're not talking about your cards. But it was interesting when I saw these cards and the good questions and the conversation starters. It reminded me of a few days ago, or last week or whatever it was, at a meeting where somebody pitched this question to the audience or to the group. What is more important, search or math? So take a quick minute, talk to somebody next to you. Which is more important, search or math? Go ahead, 60 seconds. Okay. All right, enough collaborating, enough talking amongst yourselves. There's no right answer, obviously, or I don't know, maybe there is a right answer, but how many people were arguing that, knowing search is more important than knowing math? All right. How many people said that knowing math is more important than knowing search? It's about 50-50. Who's right in the middle, kind of like both and? Yeah, probably everybody. Okay, anyway, no right answer, but great to think about and get us into the conversation, into thinking about how do people learn today and what are we actually trying to accomplish. So in the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you a quick story about challenge-based learning, talk a little bit about the work at the U.S. Department of Education, give you a sense of what Digital Promise is doing, and hopefully at that point we have about 15 minutes left for questions, comments, thoughts. There are microphones in the audience, so tee up your questions and ideas as I'm talking, because hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes for interactive conversation. So the story about challenge-based learning. A few days ago, I was at this same meeting where they were talking about search or math, and somebody told a story that reminded me about the work that we did at Apple, and actually NMC did a great research report and a story about it as well, about challenge-based learning. So challenge-based learning was really kind of three things. How do you create very relevant and engaging interactions with students? How does technology actually help us do new kinds of things with students? And where do we find these challenges, and how can we make it much more replicable, easy to do, streamlined? And after I left Apple, the team led by Don Henderson actually carried that work forward, and there's a great website and a community you can join. This is a framework that is useful for young children all the way up to adults. And this particular challenge was from an adult. And it was Joey Ito, who was the director of the MIT Media Lab. So in April 2011, who remembers what happened? Right? Big earthquake. Subsequent issues at Fukushima with the nuclear power plant. So let's think about this in terms of a challenge. So the current event was the earthquake and the subsequent issues at the nuclear power plants. That was a big issue. Now, as you think about challenge-based learning, it's very easy to find all sorts of issues. Things are happening every single day. You open any newspaper and you can find 20 challenges easily. Some of those may be interesting to your students. So there's a current event. The big idea, public health. The essential question that he had, what is radiation and is it safe? And people all over Japan were saying, is it safe? The challenge then was to measure, record, and communicate radiation levels. So being a brilliant researcher and having the resources of MIT behind him, started with questions. What are the questions associated with? What is radiation? How do you measure it? What are safe levels? Where is it found? How could we raise money for working on this? Who can help us? If you think through, there's a whole host of essential questions and research questions that just get us just starting thinking about this. Then the research is associated with experts, people around him, people over obviously in Japan that were doing this work already from government and other institutions. The research included peers and colleagues, etc. Solution development, and of course I am spinning through this and also probably taking some creative license with Joey Ito's story. But the solution development was associated with creating something called an eye Geiger, right? So it was a device that could be plugged into an iPhone, and then they could develop enough of these so they could crowdsource the measurement of radiation. So whereas the government was going around measuring in communities and then leaving and not giving people the results, what they did instead is they used a Kickstarter campaign, they crowdsourced, they got many people measuring using these devices that they designed and developed and distributed. People uploaded their data and they created a public website that had orders of magnitude more data than the government was creating. In the process, as they traveled, they could begin to tell people and help people understand much more about the radiation, about how to deal with soil, about how to think about it, and wind currents, and the kinds of things that impact the levels of radiation and your own personal safety. So it was a tremendous project, and as I heard him quickly tell this story, I had to go back and research it a little bit and find out exactly what happened, because it just reminded me again of challenge-based learning and these kinds of things that we now can engage students in working on. That might be something for a higher ed kind of an organization. There are many challenges near and dear to people's hearts, from young children all the way up. So challenge-based learning. A big part of challenge-based learning is also implementing the solution, not just thinking about big ideas and communicating them, but then going and taking action. So great story. And it makes us think about what are the skills and attributes that were exhibited in this work? What technologies enable this work? Much of what we think about in challenge-based learning, you can't do without technology. A lot of people say, well, you can still do these kinds of things. But what we found is that when people are engaging students in complex projects, many times teachers were doing all the work, faculty members doing the work, finding the resources, bringing them, saying, read this, do this, here's the questions, you answer the questions, I'll give you the questions. And what we tried to do is really redesign that. So we stepped back and said, so how do you actually help learners, students, other people ask great questions? Again, the introduction was pertinent as well. So there you go. So then I moved on to the US Department of Education in 2009 and had the opportunity to launch the National Education Technology Plan. We focused, and how many people here were involved in the development of that? Oh, come on. You must have been Larry. All right, Larry raised his hand. It's interesting. There were close to 1,000 people nationally that either commented, participated in forums, actively wrote stories, case studies, and the like. So it was quite an effort, focused in on how people learn and how can we actually personalize learning with the kinds of technology that we have today. How do we use technology to measure what matters and what does matter? What kinds of learning? How do we think about that in the 21st century? Talked about the highly connected educator, the highly connected faculty member, the highly connected researcher. that is asking questions, is connected in a broad network of people who can help personally. Talked about universal design for learning, designing the kinds of environments that are helpful for people with all sorts of abilities, disabilities, preferences, and what we find, just as we do in other areas, that these kinds of technologies that we develop for people with disabilities are actually helpful for many other people as well. We've talked a lot about and focused in on lifelong and life-wide. So this was not a K-12 plan. This is a early learning to lifelong learning, focusing in on how technologies can help us actually expand the opportunity to learn. And we focused on equity and access. So that was the National Ed Tech Plan. We bookended that work with the last year that I was there. The last day, actually, we got cleared out of government. And if any of you have ever worked in government, you know what the clearance process is. It's really fun. And it was called Expanding Evidence Approaches to Learning in a Digital World. This work was grounded in the idea that today, as we think about needing to expand our understanding about what's working in student learning, as we attempt to grow our evidence base, as we attempt to do kinds of research, how can we think about that in terms of the fast and sort of continuously improving environment that technologies are working within? So as people in the consumer industry create technologies, they create something, a minimally viable product, get it out there, get as many people using it as possible so that they can look at the data, continuously improve, evolve, and begin to get better and continue expanding it out. What happens in the education space is many people step back and go, whoa, I want to make sure that there's evidence that this particular technology or learning environment will help my students learn. Great question, absolutely fair. But what we found was the research that was coming out was several years later, even after the research study was conducted, and the results were actually not very helpful. So what we tried to do is say, can we actually expand the evidence approaches so we can get much more information at all the parts of the cycle of innovation. So we talked a lot about, we've dug into data mining and learning analytics and using the data that's emanating from massively implemented learning environments. Talked about rapid A/B testing. Much of what people do, again, in the consumer space is they do a rapid test. They'll show something to one set of people, randomly show something to another set of people, watch the impact and the results, and move on from there. I think Zynga was one of the first companies that I saw that was actually implementing that at scale. And in their case, it was trying to figure out which technique would get people to spend their cold hard cash on virtual blueberries. Design-based implementation research, thinking about the importance of context and how can we not just say, let's design this over here in the laboratory, now let's put it in the classroom and see what happens, but instead doing the design within the context that will be implemented within. So some of this is sort of, sounds like inside baseball, or sounds like not that exciting and interesting, but it actually is unbelievably important for us to dig into these kinds of things. And you people, many of you in higher education institutions, maybe most of you, this is something that you absolutely can dig into and help the country expand the approaches. Thinking about the metadata that's associated with the use of digital learning resources, thinking about the evidence-centered design. This has to do with building assessments and kind of backwards engineering, thinking about what is an expert doing, and then how do you build back and develop an evidence design. And then finally, sharing data sets across projects, mashing up data from external sources, inside school sources, social services perhaps, and building kind of early warning systems, and again, another opportunity to use administrative data and some of the kinds of data that are helpful to us, capturing at one time and being able to run a variety of tests leveraging that data. So this is a complex paper. I know every one of you are quite capable of digging into it. It's a long document, lots in it, really important important work in order to expand what we're doing. So some of the other things that we did, we published another paper in a draft form about grit and tenacity and perseverance. And tenacity sort of being the currency of the 21st century. How do we ensure that people are developing and building that ability to persevere, especially in the face of very difficult circumstances. We worked on the learning registry, something that had to do with being able to find the kinds of resources you need when and where you need them. The Open Data Initiative, transparency, publishing data, making things available to people so that they can create maps or websites or projects leveraging the open data sets that are available. My Data Initiative had to do with making sure that every student, every person at all levels has access to their own data so that they can make good decisions themselves or with their parents in the case of children. But the My Data Initiative, getting people to give students their own data. If you think about transcript data, that's a perfect example. Many times students get a paper copy of something, then they have to sort of fax it and carry it and bring it or whatever. This ability to begin to electronically transfer data directly to the student is something that they worked hard on. And finally, a big part of the job at the U.S. Department of Education was trying to integrate the work of technology and open education resources and open data and all of these kinds of things across all parts of the Department of Education. So in the Office of the Undersecretary, where they worked a lot on higher education, across all of the K-12 initiatives, across the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, et cetera. All of the offices, all the work across government was a technology play and trying to help everybody understand how technology is not this thing over here, but is completely and fully supportive of the goals of each and every project that people are funding. So the last thing I'll say about the Department of Education is one of the amazing things there is the opportunity to talk with and listen to people across all parts of the education ecosystem and the technology ecosystem and the research ecosystem. So these three kind of groups of people had the opportunity to learn from so many people. And what I sort of, part of the work at Apple is sort of boiling things down, trying to create a simpler idea about all of the things that are happening. So came up with this kind of triangle notion. There were kind of three things we're looking at. What do you need to learn? How can you learn it? And then how can you demonstrate what you're learning, right? So what you need to learn. These are things that are now being published freely, openly, making them available online. So in K-12, the Common Core Standards, you can now kind of access those online. People can create maps. People can create data markers, so you can begin attaching things to those Common Core Standards. You have course syllabus, right? That's an articulation of what you need to know and be able to do. Professional organizations, whether it's accounting or legal professions or whatever, articulate what people need to know to be in that profession. As we see the proliferation of MOOCs, much of that is based on the fact that now we have kind of a bigger articulation of what people need to know and be able to do, so people can begin to create those opportunities to learn. 21st century skills, certainly thinking about critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, the kinds of things that we know are going to stand people in good stead in terms of being lifelong learners. And finally, thinking about information and knowledge flow, not just the bank of knowledge and what I know, but how does this actually flow? And John Seeley Brown has been speaking and talking about this notion of knowledge flow. So now how you can learn? You can still learn from people. People can tell you things. People can interact with people. You can take traditional classes just like you always have. You also can learn still from books, obviously. And now we also can learn online and with these massive open online courses. And I know probably all of you are in the middle of thinking through massively open online courses. And the main thing I would say, two really important things. One is the notion of open, right? So that these things can be reused. They freely available is one thing, but also can we move to a point where things can be mashed up with other things and reused. That's one thing. The second thing is, so far, most of what we're seeing is kind of traditional pedagogy created in an online space. So the ability to completely rethink and reimagine the kinds of interactions and environments that we could create for students within the context of a more massive open online course is actually really interesting. I think that in some cases it's going to more replace a textbook than maybe a teacher, right? So the teacher, the faculty member, is still about creating the seminars, engaging people, talking, interacting, and the like. So the evolution of these opportunities to learn online, I think we're sort of at the ground floor, and there's going to be a lot more happening there. Making and playing, and then obviously blends of all these kinds of things. So all these opportunities to learn, many of them now are freely available. So when we think about if you know what you need to learn, and you're going to be able to learn these things if you have the tenacity and the persistence and you're a self-starter, many things are going to be freely available to you to learn. So then we think about the third corner, and this may be where the more kind of highly leveraged people play is, right? Tests, the kinds of performance. When you defend a doctoral dissertation, you have an intense interaction. Can we begin to develop those kinds of interactions and performances as we move through some of these learning opportunities? Badging, obviously, sort of an emerging area. Creating portfolios, working online, face-to-face. All of the opportunities to demonstrate what you know as a person. So the technologies that support these three areas, there are many, obviously, but there were kind of a few things that kind of jumped out that it's like somebody ought to build this thing, right? So the what you need to learn, we can now create electronic learning progressions. So if you take the field of mathematics, yes, we have these distinct courses, and we've been sort of in silos for probably good reason, right? Things are sort of divided up. But if we think about mathematics, and it's more of a flow of mathematics, right? So all the way from numeration all the way through to things that I've never engaged in, calculus and beyond kinds of things. We can now create these progressions, and if you think about sort of latitude, longitude markers where you can begin to pinpoint the kinds of things that you need to know and be able to do, and begin to build demonstrations of those kinds of things. Electronic learning progressions of those articulations about what you need to know and be able to do are actually going to be incredibly helpful. If we have that, then we can create something called a learning positioning system. Where am I on that progression? Where am I going? How am I going to get there? What's the direction? What are some recommendations? Who are the people that I can learn with? This notion of a learning positioning system can position you on the progression that you're trying to move along. If you can do this throughout your education career, even better. It will break us out of these kind of false stops between grade levels, between courses, between actually even segments of education like high school and college. We can begin to think of this as a learning positioning system based on based on learning progressions that, again, are continuously improving. And finally, we need electronic student records. A student record that isn't just the data, isn't just the external things that I've been given, but also includes badges, perhaps. It includes my work, my demonstrations of my progress. It includes my goals, where am I trying to get to, where have I been, et cetera. So these three sort of technology plays are going to bolster the opportunity to learn and leverage personalized environments much more so than we've done today. So now I'm on to Digital Promise. Yes, I start Monday, so haven't started yet, but have a lot of ideas about where we should go. But it's based on this mission statement. So Digital Promise, it's a bipartisan nonprofit entity authorized by Congress with a big, huge mission. I'll read this. To support a comprehensive research and development program to harness the increasing capacity of advanced information and digital technologies to improve all levels of learning and education, formal and informal, in order to provide Americans with the knowledge and skills needed to compete in the global economy. So it has a big, huge mission. The mission is to vastly improve the opportunity to learn, to spur innovation by leveraging the best possible technologies, the best possible minds, the best researchers, the best combinations of people and ideas and and designs and developments and push it forward for the country. So the first initiative that Digital Promise did from the inception, and it was launched in September of 2011 at the White House with President Obama, was the League of Innovative Schools. So first it's saying, okay, let's kind of focus in K-12, think through League of Innovative Schools. And they've designed and developed this. It's a close club of about 33 superintendents. About 2.5 million students are represented, and thinking about three things. How do we vastly improve procurement? Not that exciting. Thinking about research and doing some actually specific projects about research, and then also knowledge sharing, best practices, and designing and developing new ideas for new schools. Likewise, there's an opportunity to fully engage faculty and teachers and others in innovative practices. Can we actually, get people to spotlight those kinds of great things that are happening in classrooms? And many people are doing this already. So thinking of it more like a big campaign to really focus and spotlight on innovative teachers. Thinking about a consumer information service. One of the things that we've seen is people at all levels of learning, whether you're a parent, whether you're in the workforce, you're in school, you're teaching, everybody's always trying to figure out kind of what are the emerging technologies, what's happening out there, what are the products, what are the services. So can we create a consumer information service that includes many levels of information, all the way from kind of the basic vendor information and what research the idea or the product was even created based on, right? So connection to basic research, all the way up to some of the kinds of data and evidence we've been talking about. A specific focus on entrepreneurs and developers. Everything that we do at Digital Promise will be sort of at the intersection of educators, professional educators, people responsible for learning, researchers, right? People who are researching and designing and thinking about learning, and entrepreneurs and developers and even investors. So kind of the intersection of those three. So working a lot with entrepreneurs and developers to create the best possible learning systems and interactions possible. We'll probably use the great lever of challenges and prize competitions. It's something that over the last years in government we saw, and it's sort of been emerging, that as we pitch challenges to people, some amazing ideas happen. And if we can create incentives for people to think together, work together, leverage the best technologies, like really raise the bar for the best ideas to emerge, and then and spotlight and continuously improve. That's kind of the value of thinking about and implementing challenges and prize competitions. And then finally, thinking back to the mission statement, the big thing, the big idea, the big part of the mission is advanced research and development. Can we take all of the different kinds of technologies that are designed and developed, whether it be a human interface design, whether it's speech synthesis, voice recognition, whether it be wearable technology, whatever all of the emerging technologies are, can we connect that with what we know and the emerging things that we understand about how people learn, and begin to sort of incent and support advanced R&D? So that's kind of the big long-term goal of Digital Promise. So today, our challenges, all of you, all of us, the whole country, the whole world, actually, many of you are from other countries as well, is thinking about infrastructure and access. How can we make sure that every person who needs to be connected is connected, that they have access? The notion of digital participation is more important today than ever, and it's only becoming more important. It has been sort of optional. Now when you think about the ability to access services, health information, learning, education, those things, the importance of infrastructure and the importance of making sure that we have access to every single person who needs it is timely. Second, thinking about data, information, and transparency, making sure that the data that we have is made transparent, that people are making the best use of data, that it's published broadly and openly. Paying particular attention to privacy, data security, and making sure that we have the best practices applied to education so that those things don't stop us from innovation, but rather they support the ability to raise the bar for the kinds of learning environments that we know are possible. Interoperability standards, enough said. And finally, I think one of the things that we can do together is crowdsource these kinds of challenges and engagements. When we think about these massively open online courses, and we think about the traditional pedagogy in most of them, right? You have somebody that's telling people something, giving people assignments, telling them to read something, learn something, demonstrate that they've learned it. Can we create a massive open online course that actually is an engagement in these complex challenges? Something to think about, and I think something that we actually could do. And finally, one of the most important things that I've learned is we absolutely need a national campaign to help people understand that the importance of education, yes, your child, unbelievably important, but all of us should care about everybody's children. We're still losing 1 million kids to the streets every year. Way too many, and this has been going on for way too many years. So we have this backlog of 93 million Americans who are undereducated adults. We need a national campaign that pulls out the stops and helps everybody understand that national security, social justice, and of course economic development depend on us having a robust, the best possible, world-class, robust education system possible. And it's up to all of us, you, all of us, to work together to make that happen.